yeah. New set. Nice. Like most tired millennials caught up in a hellscape of capitalism and environmental destruction caused by rich people who made it big by ruining the lives of others, I mean, I enjoy a good drink from time to time. That's a joke, of course. You shouldn't drink to dull negative emotions or forget things. It's a slippery slope into alcoholism. Oh, that's awkward. I think there's mold on this. That's not very good. I'm a pseudo bartender by trade, and I love the art behind mixology. I love making drinks for other people. I get a kick out of learning a new cocktail or more about the history of bartending. Recently, I've started watching How to Drink on YouTube, since I haven't had the chance to make drinks for many people because, you know, a deadly virus is spreading faster than we can convince people to get vaccinated for it. Hi, Greg. Big fan. Is that how the kids are doing the shout outs nowadays? I wouldn't know. I've been living in a vacuum for a very long time. It's been like a year. A fun fact for you. I was trying to come up with some cocktails based on Yakuza, a series I've been covering on the channel for 3-4 years now. It was an end of the year video to celebrate, but the cocktails I made were bad. Bartender by trade, mixologist by guessing game. By the way, Greg, Yakuza inspired cocktails. There's a little a freebie for you. The gamers will eat it up, trust me. But my failure in making video game cocktails still made me think long and hard about how the Yakuza series treats drinking. And it got me thinking about covering drinking in games in general. Just as a side note, there were a lot of takes, so if I sound a little ooh, you know why. Drinking in games has a weird history, largely because how cultures view drinking is incredibly varied from country to country. The way we treat drinking in our respective society influences how we portray those things in our respective media. And when said media crosses over into other countries or cultures, it sometimes has to play by said cultures' rules. But the iconography of drinking is harder to scrub out of a game's identity. Drinking in video games is basically as old as video games themselves. The arcade game Tapper, published as an action game where players serve root beer to thirsty guests, began as a Budweiser-sponsored arcade cabinet meant for bar patrons. You'd be serving beer to the in-game customers, complete with Budweiser-branded handles on the machine. But the sponsorship fell through after critics claimed the game was attempting to market alcohol to minors. And, as my research for a different video will reveal, this wasn't entirely not the plan. Regardless, Tapper's one of the earliest video games in existence, and you can definitely take the beer out of the bar, but you won't ever take the bar out of the beer. This is a bad analogy. What I mean is, a video game where you serve root beer to customers inside what is still essentially a bar isn't just making root beer look tasty, it's making bars look like a lot of fun. Tapper set a precedent in the early days by gamifying the romanticized idea of drinking, one the industry ran with in all directions, and not always in the best ways. It's important to understand how drinking or coded drinking ends up in video games. Adults drink. Adults make games. Adults want to put the activities they partake in inside the games they make. Therefore, adults add drinking or drinking settings or the concept of alcohol consumption into games. And sometimes, they don't think about time and place when they do it. They don't think about how their target audience and what they want to celebrate from their personal lives are going to interact. So sometimes we'll get what I call a child-friendly bar. These are areas in a game which are, for all intents and purposes, a bar, but without the explicit mention of alcohol. Whether due to localization or original intent, characters might be inebriated off of some other non-alcoholic beverage, and they might be referred to as dizzy instead of tipsy or drunk. You've probably got more than a couple of examples of this from your own experiences with video games, but the most vivid example I can remember is Majora's Mask's Milk Bar. Not a localization change, the milk bar in Majora's Mask is exactly that. They serve milk to their customers. And then the whole disguise falls apart. Have you seen this place? The design of the milk bar mimics a high-class bar from the 80s, complete with a concert stage and dim lighting. It's a members-only affair, and they don't serve minors. This is, for some reason, an adult-only milk bar. In order to buy milk from here, Link has to be wearing the Romani mask, which according to its description, is a mask marking the wearer as a member of the milk bar and an adult. I think Majora's Mask taught a lot of kids about fake IDs when they were like 8 years old. Don't get me wrong, this is super funny and not a damning piece of evidence that video games are trying to turn children into alcoholics. Eiji Aonuma is not in Big Alcohol's pocket. Yoshiaki Koizumi didn't put a milk bar into Majora's Mask to convince kids to drink. At least I hope not. But it's worth acknowledging the dangers of framing bars as secret clubs you should sneak into to a large, impressionable audience. Especially if in-game, the child is drinking the secret club milk for hard points. Sorry, just the secret club milk is good for you. Oh my god. Even if alcohol isn't explicitly mentioned, when we get old enough to realize what these references are actually about, we start to apply the same nostalgia for those things to their real counterparts. Media in general can hype up the act of drinking and underage drinking in ways young adults will positively react to, whether or not it's meant to elicit the reaction. Drinking alcohol as an in-game mechanic creates a similar issue with some exceptions. Typically, alcohol in video games is a double-edged sword, where drinking alcohol increases some stats but lowers another. Fallout trades a stat buff for another stat debuff, and Skyrim's alcohol will instantly recover your stamina but slow its overall regeneration for a set amount of time. In Fable 2, the double-edged quality of alcohol works via cosmetic changes in exchange for experience points. Different drinks will reward different kinds of experience, but alcohol also skews your hero towards corruption and makes them heavier. Because apparently drinking is an issue of moral fiber, and weight gain is synonymous with corruption. Was that a Molyneux idea? Hey, has anyone made a video about how obnoxiously self-righteous Fable is? It's like having a D&D campaign in a church. Other games use alcohol as ways to enable a special set of moves. Notably, the Yakuza series requires you to be inebriated in order to perform certain special finishers, and has a bunch of abilities increasing your attack power and the rate your special meter increases by when you're drunk. In Jade Empire, which I've just realized is officially what one can now consider a deep cut, you can use a drunken master martial arts style. It's incredibly powerful and requires you to drink wine while fighting to use it. All of these examples, whether being a balance of pros and cons or not, are effectively implementing the use of alcohol in their games as a source of power. The gamification of alcohol implies its consumption gives the user strength beyond their normal means. Even when it's a double-edged sword, it still implies an exchange of strength in one area for another. The player is made to think consuming alcohol will grant them temporary boons to solve their problem, and begins treating alcohol consumption as a means to an end. And again, I'm not saying this transfers over into our real world as easily as learning how to sing your ABCs with Barney, which I think is another deep cut nowadays. I am dating myself so hard in this video. This isn't a soapbox about violence and drinking in video games, turning our children into little train wrecks. But unlike committing gratuitous amounts of violence, alcohol consumption is more accessible, approachable. Drinking alcohol usually begins as a curiosity or a novelty. It can be something nice to have in moderation, but the way video games portray it can do a lot to convince someone to pick up drinking, and this is probably bad. Drinking being presented to us as a font to momentarily draw strength from might not be the best convention to follow. Gamifying drinking in media marketed towards young adults probably isn't the best convention to uphold. Another unintentional consequence of drinking in games is the lack of empathizing with the person drinking and a lax attitude towards moderation. Drinking is often portrayed comedically in video games. Being drunk in video games is comedy. Binge drinking in video games is comedy. Conker's Bad Fur Day is an entire game about getting wasted, starring an alcoholic squirrel. Excessive drinking in Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption yields hilarious results, like an awkward, fussy camera denoting dizziness, awful dancing, and playing instruments like shit. Drink too much and you'll puke your guts out, laugh about it with your friends, and get back to making your character sloshed. Or in the cases where drinking is power, get back to giving yourself those gains. And listen, I get it. I get why it's funny, because I think it's funny. Alcoholism is a serious issue. It can run in your family, it runs in my family, and I am acutely aware of the damage alcoholism can cause an individual and their loved ones. But that being said, drunk people are funny. Being drunk is funny, but not every drunk is an alcoholic. Alcoholism isn't funny. As a 29-year-old man, if I saw a friend of mine drinking way more than they should at a party, I'd step in and try to stop them. If I knew a friend was binge drinking so much they'd puke on a regular basis, I'd convince them to get some help and then get them said help. But I've been younger, and I've been to parties where binge drinking was normal, and I remember looking around at my classmates and my friends and just laughing about it. And I can't help but wonder if my apathy towards problematic drinking wasn't brought on by the video games I was playing. If drinking in games had desensitized me to the seriousness of drinking long before I ever tried alcohol in the first place. One video game about a hungover squirrel is a funny joke for an adult who's had a night. Several video games where teens can laugh at a video game character puking over and over again or drinking excessively to laugh at the consequences is normalizing a bad habit. It may not convince whoever is playing to become a binge drinker, but it can convince them it isn't a big deal if someone else is doing it, even though it definitely is. I continue to stress that I don't think any of this is intentional, but there's a degree of ignorance about it. I think it results from both game developers not thinking about drinking from the perspective of how younger people might see it, nor thinking about it beyond finding a way to turn it into a mechanic. Thinking about how to include alcohol in your low fantasy game, but also give it a functional purpose, probably overrides the other concerns during crunch and executive pressure. But also, game developers back in the day perhaps lacked a respectful attitude towards the dangers of drinking themselves. After all, the media which influences us is based on media that inspired its creators, and drinking's been hyped up in the entertainment industry for a long time. It's not all bad, though. There's been a concentrated effort in some games to curtail the amount of drinking someone can do, and also create a more intimate experience revolving around the act of drinking. These efforts focus more on mixology, the science behind creating alcohol, and instead romanticize moderation as opposed to outright debauchery. Even though it portrays drinking as strength, Yakuza is famous for sitting down players who order a drink and enthralling them with descriptions of their spirits, where it's from, how it's made, how long it's aged. Yakuza provides an air of class and sophistication to what the player is imbibing. It is blatant product placement, but it gives importance to your choices when drinking in-game. It teaches you something about the alcohol and slows down the act of drinking into an educational moment. Coupled with the soft lighting and quiet space away from the noises of the city, Yakuza encourages you to take your time with the drink. Yakuza also refuses to sell you alcohol past your tolerance, whether it's the bartender cutting you off or the main character themselves drawing a line before a point of no return. Valhalla, a cyberpunk bartender action game, is a visual novel where you, the player, are the bartender, serving drinks to several characters who frequent your establishment. The dialogue between you and these characters is dependent on the kind of drink you make for them. Over time, you'll figure out their favorite concoction, at which point your connection with them grows as they open up to you more. Valhalla focuses on the art of bartending, the challenge in building a drink for a stranger, and the privacy and tenderness sharing a drink with someone can provide. It shows drinking as a private moment for yourself or with a few others, something to savor, something to last you the conversation, and in limited quantities. Other games have spoken on alcohol abuse outright, having entire story arcs centered around the trauma which can lead to it. In Psychonauts 2, Raz, no not that one, assists multiple characters with their ongoing trauma, helping them by finding a path to recovery. Spoilers for Psychonauts 2. Among these is legendary psychonaut Bob Zanotto and his struggle with alcoholism. Inside Bob Zanotto's mind is a series of levels dedicated to his loss, how alcoholism seized his life, and the metaphorical drowning of his sorrows. His mind is an archipelago of dried up islands, the rest of it drowned underneath an ocean of spirits. Over the course of these stages, Raz helps Bob process his grief, plant the seeds of growth, and sober up. In each part of Bob's mind, Raz has to push through the sea of alcohol in order to get to the bottom of every bottle, and pull out the memories and feelings Bob had metaphorically bottled up inside the bottles he had emptied out. The collected seeds eventually grow into the chapter's boss fight, 3 plants, each representing a part of Bob's loss, trying to finally consume him. It's just one exceptionally executed part of Psychonauts 2, and because of how child-friendly Psychonauts 2 is, it's also a deeply important moment in the history of drinking in games. One where the dangers of alcohol abuse are taken seriously without also including the consumption or celebration of it. It sort of makes you realize there aren't very many games out there with this perspective, and there probably should be. Drinking in games is difficult to navigate because it's very much influenced by the way we view drinking itself. Drinking can be incredibly dangerous, but drinking can also be a fun mess of a time. A night of debauchery can be enjoyable, as can a night where you sit in your big chair and have an old-fashioned while you watch Scooby-Doo reruns. Rather than say having drinking or drunks in a game is bad or problematic, it might be better to ask, how is the use of alcohol in this game being presented? What is alcohol doing here functionally or tonally, and is it perpetuating harmful behavior? Is it enabling or reinforcing destructive habits? For me, drinking in games is at its best when it expresses moderation, intimacy, and artistry. When drinking is respected for what it is, enjoyable, fascinating, a treat, but dangerous when abused. When it isn't painted over to hide what it is, when it's treated with the sophistication and awareness you should approach it with. And when it isn't, we should make the effort to be aware of where it's coming from. We should keep in mind that in a virtual space this might be hilarious, but in the real world, it's something to take seriously. And if this is something obvious to you, the viewer, then make sure it's obvious to your friends as well. Drink responsibly, think responsibly, and look out for each other.